ETF share classes are not something that's new in the US. So Vanguard has had ETF share classes of its mutual funds for a number of years, but they put a patent in place that essentially restricted other asset managers from launching ETF share classes. But that patent has recently expired. And as a result of that, what we've seen is a plethora of both existing ETF issuers and mutual fund issuers making applications to the SEC to allow them to launch ETF share classes. Now, those filings are with the SEC. There isn't any clear line of sight in terms of where they whether they get approved or not. But it's certainly something the industry is working with the SEC, and if they are approved, we'll certainly see the emergence of more ETF share classes in a US construct. So the noise in the US, people interpret that there's similar noises here in Europe. That is not the case. ETF share classes have been around in Europe for about 15 years. In fact, Ashmore were one of the first issuers that launched an ETF share class version of their active mutual fund, as I said, about 15 years ago, with limited success at the time. So it's been permissible, but that issuers launch ETF share classes for a number of years, but it's not something that we've seen taken off. But from our perspective, there's a number of practical considerations you need to think about if you're looking to launch an ETF share class. So number one, the operating models aren't tested for ETF share classes versus mutual fund share classes in the one structure. Because you need to make sure that the technology and the operating model works. How do you segregate fees from a mutual fund versus the total expense ratio in an ETF, for example? And the second thing I'd say, and very importantly, is tax considerations. In an earlier series, we talked about the benefits of holding US equities in an ETF wrapper, where you bring share classes of a mutual fund and ETF share classes together. There's not an ability to access the tax treaty between the US and certain ETF domiciles. So that's an important consideration, and that can have a detrimental effect on performance relative to pure ETFs. And finally, I would say pricing. Pricing considerations, so the fundamental economics of an ETF share classes versus mutual fund. How do you decide on pricing points of mutual funds versus ETF share classes? All of these, they're not insurmountable, but there are challenges that you need to consider. I will say there are certain product strategies, particularly for fixed income, for example, that don't benefit from any performance uplift on tax treaties. So fixed income strategies might be appropriate for ETF share classes, but equity funds, certainly you need to give a lot more consideration.